900 to 540 BCE was a turbulent time to live in what is today the Middle East. The rise and fall of so many great empires, led by famous monarchs, had caused chaos for many of the smaller groups living under the yoke of these huge states. One such people were the Israelites, whose fortunes had gotten gradually worse since their golden age under kings like David and Solomon. There had even been a time when the Israelites had themselves carved a bloody canyon through the lands of their neighbors, patronized by their one God, who they believed had chosen them as his people. But in 540 BCE, stories of how the Israelite David had slain Goliath, the Philistine, or how Moses had led the chosen people from slavery in Egypt under the guidance of their God, were commonly told amongst the practitioners of a way of life that was well on its way to becoming the recognizable Judaism that we know today. These stories gave hope to the Israelites. To be quite frank, since Solomon had died, leaving behind a great temple to Yahweh, things had not been going too well for the chosen people. Their young empire was soon divided between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. They had suffered the Egyptians, the Assyrians, and now the Babylonians. Having chosen the wrong side in a war against the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, the divided kingdoms were absorbed into the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The temple to Yahweh was destroyed, the last king of Judah was blinded, and the nobles who had endorsed the war against Babylon were all horribly put to death. The chosen people, too rebellious to be allowed to stay together, had been separated and had been deported back to Babylon in stages. Determined that their unique faith and practices survived no matter what, the Jews continued to make life difficult for the Babylonians by refusing to assimilate or compromise on their religion. In 540 BCE, the Jewish community at Babylon was presented with a strange offer. A foreign king from the land of Iran to the east was marching on the city, and if they were willing to aid his cause, he would free them and allow them to return home to Judah. The same messages reached the priests of the Babylonian patron god Marduk. Marduk had long been the central deity of Babylonian worship, but the king in 540 BC had neglected this. A usurper from outside the royal dynasty, Nabonidus of Babylon was a keen archaeologist. He was so into his study that he spent more time piecing together the history of his city than he did ruling it. Having found evidence that the cult of Marduk was actually the successor of an older cult to the moon god Sin, he had failed to partake in any of the sacred duties or rituals that kept the priesthood on his side. In time, these fifth columnists would be the reason that Cyrus of Persia would walk into Babylon without firing a single arrow, less of a conqueror and more of a liberator. Of course, we don't know for sure exactly how Cyrus conquered Babylon. The idea that the state was fragile from within is an interpretation by modern historians. The Bible claims that the Babylonians were partying with the riches stolen from Jerusalem when the vengeance of Yahweh found them. The party is struck dumb when a hand appears mid-air to write in Hebrew on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Horrified, Daniel, of Lion's Den fame, is brought in to translate the Hebrew. He translates for the king and explains that God has numbered the days of his kingdom and brought it to an end. God has weighed the value of his soul and found it wanting, and the kingdom will be divided amongst the Medes and Persians. That night, the Medes conquer Babylon and kill its king. There are a lot of reasons that this story, great as it is almost certainly fiction. Regardless, this is the Hebrew account of the fall of Babylon to Persia. Cyrus, the king that liberated them, would go on to be the only non-Jewish Messiah in the Bible. He allows the Jews to return home and even pays for their new temple in Jerusalem to replace the one burnt by the Babylonians. All the other accounts contradict each other. The Cyrus cylinder and the Babylonian chronicles both say the city fell without a fight. Herodotus, on the other hand, says that there was a fight, even if not a particularly impressive one. In Herodotus' story, Cyrus, or maybe his general Gobryas, divert the rivers around Babylon to make one of them shallow enough to ford into the city. Apparently this is done with such surprise that the Babylonians, who were in the middle of a religious festival, were too busy singing and dancing to notice their city fall. How Babylon fell, through siege, trickery, or rebellion from within, will forever be uncertain. The point is that it does fall around 539 BCE, and becomes yet another province in the growing Persian Empire. This is the height of Cyrus's power. He's transformed the world in a way that no single figure in history had ever done before him. He'd pioneered a new form of ruling, where kings had traditionally used terror and destruction to keep people in line. Cyrus invited them to dinner. He realized that if all the powerful figures of the empire were Persian, none of the other cultures and people of the empire would ever accept him on a permanent basis. So he allowed people to self-govern and live how they saw fit, provided it didn't get in the way of Persia. He'd transformed the Persian army from an untrained coalition of mountain tribesmen into the largest and best-trained fighting force in the world. His military was made up of Median cavalry, light infantry from Saka, heavy infantry from Anatolia, archers from Assyria and Mesopotamia, and a number of other peoples, all brought together for the first time under the same banner. The whole region, which not long ago had been many feuding peoples, was now one huge administrative beast. Each region was ruled by a satrap who got his orders directly from the royal court. Despite traveling over distances that most people in the world would never travel in their lifetime, communication in the Near East was faster than ever before. Horsemen flew up and down the royal road, traveling from Sardis to Susa in 9 days, a feat that took Greek travelers and traders up to 3 months. Even Herodotus can't help but be impressed by the effectiveness of the royal roads, saying of them, "There is nothing in the world that travels faster than Persian couriers, and neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Cyrus could look out on his kingdom with pride, knowing that he had built something unique in the world so far, and greater than anything any previous monarch had dreamed of. There was still one problem, however. For the king of a hereditary monarchy, there is no right amount of children. If you have only one heir, you risk them dying before they can make another. Have more than one heir, and you risk your children becoming rivals for power. Cyrus had lots of children that we know of, and probably even more that we don't. But the ones to remember are Cambyses, his eldest son, Bardia, his second son, and Atossa, one of his daughters. Cyrus knew that if he left his empire to Cambyses, Bardia would be perfectly capable of rallying support behind his own claim and potentially cause a civil war. So he found a compromise. The empire would go to Cambyses, the eldest, named in the Persian tradition after his grandfather. The second son, Bardia, is made satrap of the eastern provinces far east enough from the Persian heartland that the two brothers would not be so close to each other as to become competitive. Hopefully this would give the second brother enough power to satisfy him and prevent any temptation to overthrow his sibling. Succession sorted, now the aging Cyrus could finally relax. I mean, he could relax if he wanted to. He obviously didn't. The man was at heart a soldier and a conqueror, and he sought adventure and warfare not only for himself, but for the moral character of his people. When the empire had first been won, the Persian nobles had approached Cyrus with an exciting proposal. Now that they were the lords of Asia, why bother staying in the rugged and unforgiving lands of southern Iran? Why not move into the palaces of Mesopotamia or some of the other regions of the empire? As the ruling class, they could have first pick of the best lands and the most luxurious living. Cyrus is deeply unimpressed with this. Soft lands breed soft men. If you desire to rule in luxury, he told them, be prepared to rule no longer. It's impossible for one country to produce both good crops and conquerors. Perhaps fearing that they were growing fat and soft in Mesopotamia, a region famous for its good food, good wine, and abundance of prostitutes, Cyrus raises his banners once again and calls the men of Persia on campaign. This time he was punching out against the nomadic people of the Central Asian steppe. He would start his conquest by forging an alliance with the Massagetae, the first large tribe of nomads across his border. He sent ambassadors to their queen, Tomyris, with an offer of marriage from Cyrus himself. Surely she wouldn't be able to resist becoming a Persian queen. But Tomyris responded that she would not accept. It was obvious to her that Cyrus only wanted her people's submission to him, and she didn't intend to join the ever-expanding club of ex-monarchs that surrounded the king. Cyrus responded with a threat. He moved up to the river that bordered his territory with that of the Massagetae and started building a bridge to cross. At this point, he receives yet another letter from the nomadic queen. It reads, "King of Persia, abandon your zeal for this enterprise. You cannot know if in the end it'll come out right for you. Rule your own people and try to bear the sight of me ruling mine. But no, you won't take this advice. Since peace is the last thing that you desire, you need not bother building the bridge. We will pull back 3 days' journey from the border and let you march to meet us in our land. Or if you prefer to meet us in your own land, withdraw the same distance." Cyrus calls a council of war. Every one of his advisors argues that they should lure the Massagetae onto Persian ground, familiar ground, all except for Croesus, who stays quiet until it's his turn to speak, and then calmly explains why he thinks differently. He tells Cyrus that fortune is like a wheel. Oh great, here come those Greek worldviews again. It is not the nature of a wheel that one spoke would be on top all of the time. He tells Cyrus that if he loses in his own territory, his empire might collapse, as the Massagetae would continue to advance through his eastern provinces. Likewise, he would gain nothing from a victory in his own lands, as the Massagetae would simply retreat to their own and the stalemate would continue. Croesus then suggests to Cyrus another plan that he's been cooking up to minimize Persian losses. The Persians advanced into Queen Tomyris' land. Firstly, they send an initial recon party. The party was small in number, even though they guarded many caravans and supplies, and they were far ahead of the main army, vulnerably wondering about the hostile landscape. Predictably, the Massagetae fall on them, commanded by the queen's son, Spargopyces, and quickly capture the camp. The Persians put up so little fight that the Massagetae must have wondered how these people had ever conquered an empire. In truth, it had all been part of Croesus and Cyrus's plan. The caravans were full of livestock and wine. After their victory, the Massagetae took this food and drink for themselves and started indulging in it. Now, the Masagetai as a people apparently had very little contact with alcohol, so the average ration of wine for a Persian, a practiced drinker, would be almost enough to kill one of these lightweights. As a result, the victorious tribesmen don't get far before they start passing out. When the nomadic prince wakes up the next morning, with no clue what happened, he finds himself in Cyrus's camp. The soldiers under his command, a third of the entire army, had been attacked by the Persians as they drunkenly stumbled away from their easy victory. And Cyrus was smiling at the prince. He had in his hand a letter from the young man's mother. It read, "Cyrus, you bloodthirsty man, you've used fruit of the vine which you swill until it drives you so mad that it sinks into your bodies and foul language rises up to your tongues. It was the drug that was the trick you relied on to overcome my son, rather than conquering him in battle. Now I'm giving you good advice, so listen carefully. Give me back my son, and then you can leave this country without paying for the brutality you have shown my people. If you do not, I swear by the sun, Lord of the Masagetai, that I will quench your thirst for blood." Cyrus is impressed by this. He tells the prince with a smile that it looks like his mother's going to negotiate for his release. She might even negotiate her entire kingdom away for him. The prince stayed silent, until finally he asked to be untied. There was nowhere he could run while he was in the middle of the Persian camp, so at least allow him to move his hands. Cyrus sees no harm in this and unties the boy. As soon as he's free to move, the prince commits suicide. No idea how, he just does. By doing this, he ensures that his mother would never be tempted to give anything to the King of Kings in exchange for his life. In fact, as Tamiris would blame Cyrus for her son's death, it ensured the Masagetai would fight. And that's exactly what they did. A few days later, the two armies finally meet one another. For some time, the battle is a ranged one, with both sides refusing to engage and simply shooting arrows at each other, until finally they run out of ammunition. When the two sides finally meet, the fighting is brutal. Herodotus says it's the largest and bloodiest battle fought by foreigners that he'd ever heard of. Before long, however, Tamiris and her horsemen begin to push the Persians back. Cyrus desperately tries to rally his men. He fights on the front lines himself. But it's this very bravery, however, that ends the battle. The Persian line collapses when Cyrus is lost in a sea of horsemen. Unable to help him, the Persian survivors return to their side of the river, and the great king is not amongst them. The corpse of Cyrus the Great is discovered by Tamiris as she walks the battlefield. When she finds the body, she decapitates him, and puts the head in a wineskin filled with human blood. She screams in rage at the disembodied head. "Though I have come through the battle alive and victorious, you have destroyed me by taking my son from me. So as I warned, I will quench your thirst for blood." And so Cyrus the Great, first king of Persia, dies. Or not. This is the story Herodotus gives us. But he starts it with a disclaimer saying that he knows of many other stories regarding the great king's end. He almost certainly died on campaign, as the Persians themselves would even admit that he met his end in battle. Although his death doesn't seem to have been that disastrous, it resulted in no loss of territory or great civil strife. Though we can't be certain how he died, we can be fairly sure he was gone by 530 BCE, when his son Cambyses is made king. Cyrus's tomb in southern Iran still survives to this day as a World Heritage Site. Plutarch tells us that the inscription once read, "Whoever you are, and wherever you're from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who won the Persians their empire. Do not therefore begrudge me this bit of earth that covers my bones." A fitting sentiment for one of the most influential human beings to have ever lived.